Go ahead.
Good morning, all. I'm Reverend Patricia Hunter, one of the co-chairs for the Seattle Community Police Commission, and today is Wednesday, October 18th, and welcome everyone to today's CPC meeting. The Seattle Community Police Commission acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, including the Muckleshoot, Squamish, and Duwamish people, past and present. And with humility, we recognize how much we benefit from living on their land and water. The Seattle Community Police Commission honors and highly esteems these tribes, and we hope that this acknowledgement will encourage authentic relationships with urban Native people and all Coast Salish tribes. At this point, I will take our attendance. Commissioner Lars Erickson.
Good morning, here.
Good morning. Commissioner Patricia Hunter is present. Commissioner Philip Sanchez.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning and welcome. Commissioner Adrian Levitt is not here. He is excused. He let us know he could not be present today. Commissioner Suzette Dickerson. Commissioner Lynn Wilson.
Good morning, President.
Good morning. Commissioner Raven Nicole Tyler.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Commissioner Mary Ruffin.
Morning, present.
Morning. Commissioner Harriet Walden.
Present.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And Commissioner Joel Merkel.
Good morning.
Morning. Commissioner Lejea Washington.
Present.
Commissioner Washington is not present.
So I am, I'm switched. I go by Blue Muse, so I am.
No,
Thank you,
Commissioner
sir.
Washington is not present.
Okay.
Officer Mark Mullins.
Officer Mark Mullins is here.
Thank you. And Commissioner Tony Gatke is not able to be with us today. Commissioner Jeremy Wood. Not present. Commissioner Tasha Johnson is also not able to be with us today. And Commissioner Erica Newman.
Present.
Morning, present. I'm glad to have you today. I will now entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as posted. Is there a motion?
I move to adopt the agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda as distributed and posted. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Aye.
None. Chair does not recognize any. Thank you. Any concerns about the minutes? I do have a couple of corrections that I would like to point out. Under the co-chair update, in the first sentence, the Seattle City Council recently held a hearing to assess the nomination of, there's a word "to" there, needs to be deleted. So to assess the nomination of Philip Sanchez, and then the very last sentence of that paragraph as well is, I believe it should be approval was anticipated by the upcoming meeting on October 15th. So with those corrections, may I entertain a motion to receive the minutes as corrected?
I motion to receive the minutes as corrected.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes as corrected. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay? Abstentions? Great, then the minutes have been approved. Next, we will move into our co-chair updates, and Commissioner Merkel.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I have a couple updates for you. First, I would like to welcome Commissioner Phil Sanchez. This is his first CPC meeting since the City Council confirmed his appointment to the commission. Mr. Sanchez is here remotely today, and I'd like to go ahead and just recognize Mr. Sanchez and give you an opportunity to briefly introduce yourself, and thank you for being here.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Philip Sanchez. I'm excited to be part of the CPC. If you don't know yet, I was a criminal, or I am a criminal prosecutor, and I've been one now for over 16 years, the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. And, this was something that I reached out to Mr. Merkel about many, many months ago when I saw that there was an opportunity to be involved in, a small part of the process that can help improve our community, our law enforcement, and obviously the greater Seattle area. So I'm really pleased to be able to working with in the future now going forward with many of you, and look forward to continuing to build those relationships.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez, and your willingness to serve. And we look forward to all the work that you're going to be doing as a commissioner on the CPC. So thank you for your willingness to serve. The next update I wanted to provide is that last week, the monitor organized a meeting among all of the accountability partners, including OPA, OIG, Seattle Police, us, the CPC, and it was primarily attended by just the principals from each organization and one or two staffers from the CPC. It was Director Collie Ellis, along with myself and co-chair Reverend Walden. The fundamental purpose of the meeting was to discuss the way forward on the monitoring plan under the remaining parts of the consent decree in light of Judge Robart's most recent ruling that he issued last month. Judge Robart was there for the first, 20, 30 minutes of the meeting and addressed the accountability partners and kind of continued his discussion and observations that he made at the hearing in September where he issued the ruling. After Judge Robart left, after the first half hour or so, we kind of got down to work, going line by line through the monitoring plan from here on out with the accountability partners. And it was a very good and productive discussion. I think folks came away with it, understanding more clearly what the plan is from here and what each entity's role is. There was no clarity or discussion rather on timing of when the consent decree might be lifted, if it is. That wasn't discussed. I think there was some expression of hope from some of the participants, most especially SPD, and also I should say representatives from the mayor's office were there. But SPD was hoping to kind of seek permission from the court to come out from under the consent decree and satisfy the remaining areas sooner than later. Of course, the CPC's position is that it needs to be done right, and timeline is, a value, but it's more important that it has to be done right. And we had discussions during the meeting about how things were going to be done correctly, and it was productive. So I don't have any additional comments about the meeting, but I thought it was very important that we had that meeting. I thought it was a productive discussion. And then I'll ask whether Reverend Walden or Dr. Ellis have anything else to add.
I don't have anything to add.
No, I don't have anything. Thank you, Joel.
Okay, well, and I guess I should say that the accountability partners periodically have these meetings, at least I think every quarter, to have these types of discussions. But this one was the first significant meeting like this after the order came down from the judge. So, and yes, Mr. Ward was there. I see Mr. Ward is on today's meeting. I don't know if Mr. Ward has anything to add.
Yeah, I'll look at something.
Sir, thank you for being here. We're going to ask Mr. Ward.
Okay,
Mr. Ward, do you have anything to add? Did I miss anything? You're on mute.
I think that those of you who were present at the meeting are aware that I indicated that I was encouraged by the tone of the meeting. I also thought it was a productive meeting. You talked, Joel, about the ultimate termination of the consent decree. I think that one of the messages that everyone who participated should take away is that this is up to you. And by you, I mean the oversight partners. You're right. It's going to, and I think that was the message with the judge being there, that this is up to the oversight partners. It's not up to the monitoring team. It ultimately is not up to the judge, because you are absolutely correct that this needs to be done right. And we know what the foremost outstanding issue is in regard to getting it right. It is accountability. Having said that, thank you very much for allowing me to make these remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being there. So that's all I have from a co-chair update.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ellis, do you have reports from the executive director?
Absolutely, yes. So I am here in San Diego right now. The CPC staff has been at the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference since Saturday, all of the staff. And this is the largest conference of police in the United States, and it also has representatives from around the world. SPD is here along with other law enforcement departments from Washington, for example, the Port Police we met with yesterday, the chief from Bellingham, and many others. And there's also a number from around the region. So the conference covers a range of policing topics, but some of the sessions that have been attended by CPC staff have included crisis response and co-responder models, officer safety and wellness, creating and maintaining community trust. There have been a few sessions about culture of policing and also concerns about how to watch for extremism in police departments, as well as community engagement after crises, enhancing victim support services, which is the topic of one of these morning's presentations, and many more. This is a huge conference, thousands of attendees, and so there's really a lot to cover, and this has been very valuable for staff to get in touch with other people doing similar work, learn more about what policing is like in different places around the country. This has really been very valuable for us. And at the same time, I'm going to be continuing to travel. So Community Engagement Director Felicia Cross and I are going to the annual consent decree conference in Fort Worth. Judge Robart would be there along with other people that are part of consent decrees across the country. So this is a great opportunity for us to learn more about where consent decrees are going well, where they're not going well in a number of different communities and cities that are facing these same challenges as Seattle. So that's what we're doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Next, we will go to our community engagement update, but we do not have an update as of today from our community engagement team because they're all traveling from the conference that Dr. Ellis just mentioned. So at our next meeting, we will have an update from the community engagement.
That one staff member.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for that.
Reverend Walden wanted us to mention that one of our staff members did not attend the conference. Ms. Keisha is here in the room with us.
Thank you.
At this point, we'll move into our commissioners' work group updates, and even though we are a bit short-staffed in the policy team, our expectation is that the work groups will continue to work and to meet amongst themselves and to get some of the work done until the CPC becomes fully staffed. So at this point, I'll ask if there's an update from the complainant appeals work group.
I'm not sure that there's anyone on the call who was at the last meeting. It was just a few of us, so no substantive updates, but our next meeting will include Dr. Rosenthal bringing back some of his findings. So I'm sure we'll have updates after that meeting next week.
Thank you, Commissioner Ruffin. And I believe that meeting is on the 24th of October.
I believe that's correct. Yeah, Tuesday.
Thank you. Is there an update from the police practices work group?
No, we don't have any substantive updates right now.
Okay. I know that OIG has asked the CPC for some input into their 2024 work plan, and I believe that the police practices work group could assist in offering this feedback. So if the members of that work group could please let us know when your next meeting is scheduled, and we can make sure that you get the information that you need so we can get feedback from you as we move forward to assist OIG with their work plan.
Absolutely. I'll send an email.
Thanks. How about behavioral health?
Well, I think both of the co-chairs are here. I think I heard Erica is also here. We have not had a meeting. So I haven't had a chance to get together with Erica to schedule a meeting. I would say, so if she has anything to add, she can also pipe in on this too. I will say that the next crisis intervention training at the Burien Training Center is scheduled for November 13th through the 17th. And after that in December, it's from December 11th through the 15th. So we had 4 areas to look at, which were each one has required a lot of intensive reading and understanding. So we have not been able to get together to come up with a interim plan until we get a policy person to help us. But if Erica wants to pipe in, that'd be great. And hopefully we can, she and I can get together soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn, for giving that briefing. I'm scheduled to go down to the training in December. And hopefully you and I can just connect before we can get a staff member, just to touch base. And then once we get a staff person to help us with the meeting, we can just go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Newman and Commissioner Wilson. Any legislative update for us today?
I can provide it for, oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sure. There wasn't really much to share. I just that we are currently working with a contract for lobbyists to help us kind of build relationships out in Olympia. His name is Wyatt, and we're just slowly working with him so that we can start to craft a plan within the SLA work group. I'm not sure if there's any other update that you wanted to add, Joel.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say, and just acknowledge that all you're doing a lot of really great work to support the legislative work group. So thank you, Jessica.
Of course.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica and legislative team. Next, we'll move into our presentation, our first presentation from the Crime Survivor Services. And Director Ellis, did you want to introduce our presenter this morning?
Of course, yeah. I'm really excited to introduce Dana Lockhart. She is here from Crime Survivor Services. I've known Dana for many years, and Dana has been a tireless advocate for victims in many different parts of the city. Used to be part of SPD, but has been doing this for, I don't know, decades, a very long time. And so Dana, I invited Dana to this meeting to talk about the victim side of what's happening. So there's been a lot of violence in Seattle recently. There's been concerns about how victims are treated and what the situation is like for them. So I wanted to bring Dana here to present this directly. So Dana, I can share my screen for your slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to you.
So much, Director Ellis. I just want to say I appreciate all of your work on the commission, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about the work of Crime Survivor Services, the work of our staff. and how we collaborate with the Seattle Police Department and impact the lives of folks within the Seattle area. So I am the unit manager of Crime Survivor Services. As Dr. Ellis said, I've been with the city for almost 20 years. Most of that time, I was working as a civilian manager with the Seattle Police Department within the domestic violence unit. And we have moved our programming to the Human Services Department within the Safe and Thriving Communities Division as of 2020. So I'm here to talk to you about that change and just give you some background about our work. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce two other folks who are on the call with us. Annie Lee is Deputy Director of the Human Services Department, and Erica Pablo is our new Division Director for the Safe and Thriving Communities Division. Would either of you like to pop on and say anything? Just say hi.
I just want to say good morning. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Yes, ditto. Thanks so much for having us here today. And we'll just fade away in the background and let Dana do her show.
Thank you. So the Crime Survivor Services Unit is comprised of two distinctly different programs that work together and both work very closely with the Seattle Police Department. Dr. Ellis, can you change the slide? So I'll start with the Victim Support Team. It's comprised of both community volunteers that work on the weekends, mostly out of the East Precinct, but responding citywide. And along with the community volunteers, there's two support advocates, victim support advocates that work during the week. The Victim Support Team staff and volunteers don't hold a caseload. They work mostly with domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking victims early on, often at the request of patrol, but they also work at the request of detectives as well. They provide short-term, or what we call light touch advocacy, for victims who have immediate crisis needs, such as transportation, emergency hotel stays, or they might need help getting their locks changed, or an Uber ride to somewhere safe, for instance. So as the case begins, work with the investigative units, they may be in contact with those detectives still and help navigate the criminal legal system for folks. But for the most part, this is when they pass the case on to our next team, which is the crime victim advocates. And also just important for anyone on this call to know, if you've heard about the Victim Support Team, it has been a staple program and response to domestic violence in our community since 1996. So it has changed and grown over time, obviously since 96, but again, since 2020 has been a part of the Human Services Department. So next slide, please. The Crime Victim Advocacy Team works closely within the investigative bureau within each detective's units. So their engagement with victims fulfill our statutory obligation under RCW 7.69 to inform survivors of their rights as crime victims and provide timely information about their case and the investigative process. So we have 3 advocates, crime victim advocates in the domestic violence unit. We have 5 within the sexual assault unit working with both adult and child victims of sexual assault and child abuse. And then we have 3 in our violent crimes unit working on homicide and violent assaults. And also then we have 1 vacancy. So even with all of these advocates, we are still way over capacity. The case size is double the average caseload of national best practices for system-based advocates. And it's important to note that their work on a case does not end once the case is filed with the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. On the contrary, they're attending court hearings, they're notifying victims of upcoming court dates, and they're often speaking on their behalf until sentencing. So they're working very closely with the detectives during the investigative phase, and then they also stay with that case all the way through end of sentencing. Since taking on the oversight of the crime victim advocates, I've been committed to finding ways to streamline efficiencies of their casework while also providing timely services and upholding strong partnerships with the Seattle Police Department detectives and their command staff. So next slide, please. So a bit about the formation. When the victim advocacy and victim support services were moved out of the Seattle Police Department in 2020, SPD and HSD worked collaboratively to create a memorandum of understanding that allowed non-criminal justice system employees to continue access to the CJIS materials with some restrictions. So all of our advocates continue to follow SPD protocols and to ensure CJIS compliance. The advocates are embedded within each unit in the investigative bureau, and the volunteers continue to work out of the precincts. Next slide, please. And the last 3 years have been very busy. We have worked to consolidate our data collection across the 4 investigative units with a new case records management system. And we can now track our outcomes and set case size and competency standards for all of our advocates that align with national best practices in victim advocacy. And we can track demographics for the first time. The team of advocates now have mutual support and expertise across different crime types that they can lean on. And the type of oversight of their casework can ensure that we are meeting our legal requirements and ensure that victims' rights are upheld at every step of the investigation and prosecution process. We've expanded our scope of the victim support team support to unfiled sexual assault and now also to include human trafficking cases. And we now have 4 bilingual advocates across all of the units. And finally, it was early on after our transition to HSD that I noticed that there was no dedicated process to distinguish who would get advocacy and who would not. And it was often the squeaky wheel or people with the most contact with detectives or folks within the system. So obviously there was a lot of room for bias there. So we used the city's race and social justice equity toolkit to create equitable eligibility criteria based on crime types. So what this means is that not everyone is able to receive advocacy, but we are now able to clearly point directly to the reasons as to why or why not. So next slide, please. So before I conclude, I also would love to just take this time to share with you a project that has come to fruition out of the partnership between HSD and SPD since this transition. For the last year, Crimes Forever Services has been a lead partner on an effort to launch an alternative reporting mechanism called Seek Then Speak. Seek Then Speak is an online tool that will allow someone access to valuable information and sexual assault resources, which while also providing an opportunity to report their sexual assault to law enforcement. It's a self-guided interview and reporting tool that's online for sexual assault victims. It was created by End Violence Against Women International, and it is currently used in several cities across the United States. This tool can help alleviate some of the pressure that can come with traditional reporting methods for sexual assault survivors, and hopefully reducing the potential for re-traumatization, thereby increasing access, especially for particular vulnerable populations. With the browser-based translation, all text will appear in the language that a person normally uses for access to the internet, and this greatly increases access for non-English speaking populations. Currently, the HSD's Office on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault has begun working with the Mayor's Office to coordinate launch and outreach efforts to include a press release and outreach to community partners and cross-platform promotion. So we're real excited to see that option come out for survivors of sexual assault. And that concludes my presentation. I really wanted to make sure that I left room for questions.
Thank you so much, Dana. Are there any questions from Commissioner? Yes. Commissioner Joel.
I have a couple of questions. I don't want to jump ahead of anyone else who may have some questions. Let's see, no other hands. I guess I'll just jump in. Dan, thank you for being here. I spent many years in the county prosecutor's office, domestic violence and special assault units, and I worked closely with many of the advocates in your team. I have a couple questions. One, I just want to acknowledge and thank you for expanding services to victims of sexual assaults when their cases are yet to be filed. I think it's widely known that there of all of the instances of sexual assault, only a small percentage of those cases are actually reported. And of those cases that are actually reported, having served in the prosecutor's office sexual assault unit and been responsible for filing decisions, I know that at best maybe half of those reported cases get filed. And there's all sorts of reasons why a reported case may or may not be filed. But regardless of whether a case is filed or not, anyone that reports sexual assault absolutely needs those services. And I would argue especially those who have cases that end up not being filed. So I just want to acknowledge that's a super critical service, and thank you for doing that. And I guess my question on that point is when did that begin and how's it going?
Sure. Well, I will say that our advocates, the crime victim advocates located within that unit have, for the most part, always worked collaboratively with the detectives during the investigation process. As soon as a detective is assigned, an advocate is assigned. What has changed is we now have, in this past year, 2020, we have hired what we call a pre-file advocate who is specifically dedicated to these. So they're able to have more time, more collaborative efforts with the community partners for wraparound services, more of a holistic response. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of our advocates they are working with people through the entire court process. So they spend a lot of time with people attending court and speaking on their behalf. And oftentimes the folks they're essentially chasing the court calendar because it's very, very busy. And so while we have this dedicated pre-file advocate that person is not wrapped up in court, not tied to a court calendar, they're able to spend a lot more time with the hundreds of people who come through the Seattle Police Department who will never step foot in a courtroom. So I'll say that timing wise, that was in this last year. And really the impetus for that as well was the mayor's executive order to broaden and enhance services for survivors of sexual assault. So we brought on one bilingual advocate and the pre-file advocate. And then simultaneously, we have the launch of the Seek and Speak alternative reporting option. So that pre-file advocate will be the main point of contact for all of those people who are accessing and utilizing the criminal legal system as a tool for safety and accountability. They're going to be connected with that pre-file advocate almost immediately.
Thank you. My other question is, I've been in the domestic violence unit and the special assault unit prior to 2020. I was actually in the special assault unit during 2020 when the change was made. And, at the time I had cases where there was, the advocate was from the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center. So obviously someone who was not housed within SPD and did not have that, they weren't even in the same building as the detective working on a particular case. And at the same time, I had advocates on cases where they worked just feet away from the detective and were able to kind of have that level of communication with the detective and what was going on with the case. And I saw how that would impact victim services in those particular cases. So now that it's been moved out of SPD and you're in health services, could you talk a little bit about how it has changed or impacted the services provided to advocates and how that's going, particularly in cases where a case is filed and there's a criminal legal process going on?
Sure. I will say what we have done is just continue to get laser focused on our guiding principles of trauma informed, victim centered, system based legal advocacy. And what I mean by that is because our work is so focused on what the survivor wants, which is very, very different for each individual person. We're going to be asking the survivor every step along the way how we can best serve them. And again, that's going to look very different with each person. In the past, and I will say that I didn't oversee the crime victim advocates. I oversaw the victim support team, but I worked very closely to them. I was literally desks away from the sexual assault advocates for decades and heard their good work. But I will say the efforts that we have made to just align their guiding principles, and every day they pick up the phone, it is laser focused on what the victim needs, and we uphold our partnerships. We know that the partnerships with the Seattle Police Department detectives, and again, having that access to them right down the hall, being embedded within SPD, is so critical to meet the survivors' needs. And then again, having that strong partnerships with the prosecutors through that process. We want to do what is absolute best for the survivors that we're working with. But that, I think, would be the only change, is that when we show up into a room, we're not working on behalf of the Seattle Police Department, we're working on behalf of the survivors that we're serving. And so it's just a small tweak, but I do believe it's so important. Again, because you mentioned there are people who were working with CASARC. I think CASARC is a valuable service in our community. They are a strong partner with the prosecutors, with SPD, with us. But I think survivors need options. Some people don't feel comfortable working within, working with somebody so closely who represents the Seattle Police Department, yet they want access that our advocates are able to have because of that partnership, and because we're embedded within the department. We can get access to information quickly, which is so important in these cases. So again, it's just providing more opportunities and more clear, a clear description of what we're there to do and who we represent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I see that Commissioner Sanchez has a question or comment.
Yes, good morning. And being a current prosecutor and having supervised over in our juvenile division, our SAU practice for a few years, is there any distinction with juvenile victims of special assault or sexual assault cases? Are they, or is this primarily geared for the adult victims? Just curious there.
Yeah, again, with our expanded team, we're now able to, with our dedicated supervisor on that team, we can talk with each of the advocates around what their specialty is and help to foster individual specialization within their expertise. And with that, develop specific relationships with the juvenile prosecutors, with the forensic interview team. And so sometimes cases will cross multiple, platforms, multiple relationships, multiple kind of matrix management of with CPS, other institutions. And so our team will work collaboratively for that in those regards. But for the most part, we really try to foster that individual specialization. So yes, we do. And I think that has really enhanced since we've moved over, and especially since we've broadened our team.
Great, thank you. And just as one last remark, juvenile cases are always a little bit more difficult because obviously you're dealing with very young victims, sometimes as young as 5 or as old as a teenager, obviously. But so much of that trauma, right, is shared by the family, and so it's good to know that there are victim services individualized for the victim. In the future, it'll also be great just to consider, and I know it's all about resources too, expanding services for parents, because I can tell you I've met so many parents over the years who I'm going to say inadvertently and aren't really aware that they're inflicting their trauma on their child from everything that happened, and so therefore the child also isn't able to in a healthy way, be able to move forward. So anyways, thank you so much for your services. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and Commissioner Sanchez, I just want to give a shout out to our community partner, KSARC, again, because they do have the therapy and counseling as well as parenting support groups. And we often refer parents who are impacted by this, traumatic experience to KSARC for those services.
Thank you. Commissioner Wilson?
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciate this presentation. It's really encouraging. So I did have a couple questions, but I guess I'll just focus on one aspect of this because over the years I've had experience both personally and cases I've worked on with domestic violence. And I guess, when you talk about taking a holistic approach to the victims and focusing on their needs and wants, my experience is what often happens, especially now when housing is such a big issue, is that protection orders become really difficult. And most of these cases involve people who are intimate partners. A lot of times they're living together and there's children involved. And then you have the whole housing issues. And then, so what happens a lot of times is that usually the woman who's made the complaint withdraws. So when you talk about focusing on a holistic approach, and I think it happens a lot where because of the economic situation involved, the person initially making the complaint, probably at the height of a crisis, when the reality sets in of how difficult it's going to be to move forward, even if you have services, if you don't have housing, you got a big problem. And so what happens with these cases? Do they just move forward anyway, if it's a pretty egregious situation? And how do you handle the protection orders, which may be civil protection orders and not criminal protection orders? I guess that's kind of complicated, but just like to know exactly how that is handled.
Well, that is a very big question, and I'm gonna focus on it being like a scenario of a single person. In that you've given a great example of how our teams, both the victim support team and the crime victim advocates, can work collaboratively now that we have visibility with each other on specific cases. And I see this happening all the time. They use the Teams chat, so they might be essentially staffing a case collaboratively. And what happens if, let's say that a victim support team is called out early on, what that team is focusing on is not the prosecution, is not even if the offender is apprehended. What our team at that point is focusing on is not, I train new officers. I go in and I train new officers on how to kind of conceptualize what the purpose of victim support team is. And I say, you come in, the abuse has happened, you want everything that happened up to that point, just the facts. And our VSTs come in and we don't want to talk about the facts. We want to talk about what they want to do moving forward. And so we'll hopefully in that moment, that critical moment in time where that trauma has impacted that family the most, we're going to be working on a safety plan. And that safety plan may or may not include a protection order. It may or may not include participating with, the prosecution if what the safest thing for them to do that they've identified is to go to Texas to go live with their parents to get out of Dodge, basically. And so, or they say, what I really want is to stay here and to come up with a plan and surround myself with community and have a protection order and, that be a part of it. And so that safety planning isn't just a document that we're just checking off lists. It's really just a series of questions trying to determine what that person needs to feel safe in that moment. And then every day we check in with them and that plan might change. Now, again, when we pass it on to a crime victim advocate who's working through the criminal legal system, they're going to be collaborating with the prosecutors and we're going to be focusing on how to hold the offender accountable. But our advocate, for the most part, is also checking in with them and figuring out what is going to keep them safe and what it is that they want. What we know is that after someone has left, that is the most dangerous time. That over 75% of domestic violence homicides occur after someone has left or in their when they're in the process of leaving. And so that statistic is so front and center on all of our advocates' mind. If they're not ready, or it's not safe for them, or they don't have a plan that is locked in that they feel comfortable with. And you mentioned housing. If they don't have resources, if they don't have access, for all of the reasons why an abusive relationship is paralyzing, for all of those reasons, it might not make sense for them to continue to participate in the prosecution. And so we get that, and our focus is just, how do we keep them safe? How do we uphold that safety plan that we started with on day one when those officers were outside their door? So I'm not quite sure if I've answered your question.
Yeah, you have. Thank you so much. It was really enlightening.
Great.
Thank you. I have a question. You mentioned, and I too did some work in the area of domestic violence and sexual assault, not from a legal perspective, but from the perspective of the religious community and how we can support those that are trying to get to safety and protect their children. You mentioned that your organization has done some analysis on who uses your services and who doesn't, and that there were some biases there. I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about what you found in that survey regarding the biases and what you're doing now so that more individuals avail themselves of your services.
Sure. I think there was a couple of questions in there. If I missed something, please just ask me after I'm done. But so in regards to our analysis of whether there was bias in or potential for bias in case assignments, wasn't so much what that was or what that looked like. It was that moving forward, as I was to oversee all of the hundreds of case assignments across the different crime types, we wanted to make sure that there was no room for bias. And so through that analysis, we identified case eligibility criteria. And again, that criteria is different for each crime type. For the most part, we focused on what the crime, what the charges were. And so let's take, for instance, in the violent crimes unit, we didn't just say some homicide families will get services and some won't at certain times. What we said was all families impacted by homicide will get services within the specific amount of time, and it's going to be the same standard for everybody. Or all kidnapping. What that means is that because we set those standards, of case eligibility, is that there are some people who are not getting served. And so when the case is filed with King County, we have to kind of chase the case down, and those people might say, where have you been? And it was because during the investigative phase, we don't have enough staff or advocacy in order to provide services, because we now have that standard of eligibility. But we can point back to that as why versus, well, we didn't get to your case for whatever reason. You also asked, there was something at the beginning that I think I may have missed. I'm so sorry.
No, it was just about the analysis that you did. And then I was also mentioning that my area of working with sexual assault, domestic violence, has been from the religious side of the religious community and getting families safe and children safe and
I would, oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I do want, it did mention that flagged for me that if I hadn't mentioned it before, our partnerships with service providers in the community who can address and support people with their individual, their cultural, their religious, their their communities needs and services and response. Those relationships and those collaborative efforts is first and foremost. I mean, I think that's when we're talking about when we show up on scene and we're doing that safety planning, referring to those community programs is the first thing we do. I also may not have mentioned that our system-based advocates work within the city government. We obviously we don't have confidentiality. We are subject to PDRs and those sort of things, and we're very clear with people around the limitations of our services. And so there are community providers that are able to do so much more and can really dig in much deeper and build a level of trust that is necessary for that healing to occur. And so it's, when talking about system-based advocacy and what we do, it's not one or the other. I really do believe it's a partnership. It is a safety net for folks who are experiencing multiple levels of violence. And I do respect and just honor the work of our community providers that are, now that I'm a part of HSD, I'm able to see and collaborate with our contracting teams and able to see much more deeply, kind of from a different perspective, of how these community services are able to impact the folks that we work with. And we're able to kind of tear down some of those silos and work more collaboratively in that way as well.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Sanchez, I see your hand up. Is that from your previous question? We'll assume so. Okay.
Sorry, that was actually my dog that did that.
I have one more question.
Okay.
Dan, again, thank you for being here. I have a question that may not really be related to your department, but bear with me and let me know. One thing to note is that when survivors are in trouble or freshly after the incident, sometimes a 911 call is placed, and the responding officer arrives, and oftentimes that responding officer is the first person that survivor encounters. And you talked earlier about how important it is for your team and what an important value it is for your team to be trauma informed. And I know over the years, ensuring that responding officers have that trauma informed training. And I will say, having been involved in this for many years, my observation is that things have improved on that front. My question specifically to you is, to what extent do you interface with SPD on ensuring that those types of responses are trauma informed? Is there any role for you to play, for your department to play, or is that done elsewhere with police training?
Well, sir, I guess the only way that I can answer that, although I've been a part of the department and now just partners with the department for a very long time, I feel like my life's work has been tied to helping to make the Seattle Police Department more trauma informed. We have created soft interview rooms at a few of the facilities. We have one on the 6th floor where the domestic violence detectives and sexual assault detectives are. We have one at the East Precinct. And we, again, just calling our VSTs, the purpose of, one of the most valuable benefits of having community volunteers show up at a crime scene alongside officers is to really try to make that experience more victim-centered and more trauma-informed. So when I go and train new officers, I have about an hour and a half, 2 hours of FaceTime with every new officer that comes on the force. We talk a lot about the purposes and the value of calling out community volunteers. But I slip in as much training that I can do. That statistic that I shared earlier around making sure that we're not marching in and telling people what to do is life-saving. That oftentimes, if an officer were to be insinuating that they know more than that survivor knows, that they could potentially be causing a much more dangerous situation for folks. And other than that, just being a part of the detectives units, we're consistently, pushing out trainings for people who have access to and impact survivors within all of the investigative units as well as patrol. I do also think that I'll just say I really love the 30, 90 days when they've got patrol come into the units and to really see and have more contact with survivors within each one of the investigative units. They go back to patrol much more, I think, aware. And so opportunities like that within the department. I mean, more I can share as an observer, but I will just say, it is hard work to continue to, I would just encourage the commission to kind of take this up as well as to, anything we can do to continue to support the department and becoming more trauma informed would really, I think it's great.
Thank you so much. We may have time for one more question, if there is one.
Can you answer for me? I know this. I'm saying, like, you know what I'm asking about.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
As long as I'm thank you.
Well, Dana, thank you so much and your team for coming today to share with us about the Crime Survivor Services, a critical service in our city. We are appreciative of the work that you do and the impact that you make to so many in the city of Seattle. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
May I say a little something, please?
Sure.
Officer Mullins? Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your work, ma'am. The VSTs are where I make my contact with your organization. And over the years, they have been invaluable in assisting us in domestic violence situations. When I came on the department, most of our training leaned towards getting the facts, thinking about the prosecution of the case, trying to get just the facts. We were taught to keep our emotions out of the investigation, to just basically get the numbers, the names, find out what happened, and that was it. So we have gradually evolved from that to at least trying to calm the victim, soothe the victim, and try to lessen that impact on the victim. But we still have to get the facts, and we still have to get the information. So when the VSTs come in, it is so valuable that we can basically leave the scene knowing that someone's there to follow up behind us, so that we're not leaving damage behind us, more damage. Well, I got to go write this up now, so I hope you're okay. Bye, I got to go. That was horrible, and that happened in the past when we didn't have VSTs. And so I'm just saying that I really respect the organization. I respect the volunteers, and I thank them every chance I get, because it's a partnership that's invaluable. And thank you.
Thank you, Officer Mullins. All right, I'm really excited as we move into our next presentation that one of our commissioners is on deck. Commissioner Lars Erickson. He has a presentation about the Seattle Metro Chamber and survey that y'all did. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Hunter. I think everybody on the call knows me. Lars Erickson, Commissioner on the Community Police Commission. In my daily role, I serve as the Senior Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications for the Seattle Metro Chamber. And so I'm responsible for our government relations, policy, and communications work. And part of that is this public quality of life survey that we do twice a year. We started in the fall of 2021, so this is our 5th installment of that work. And the reason I brought it to this group today is because of the public safety focus that we are seeing in this installment. So I'll get to it. This is available online. Kali posted it on the Commission's website, this version of the report. This is a focus on public safety. The breadth of the research is much deeper, and that is on the commission on the Chamber's website and available to the public. So I will start, and I think there we go. Just some quick notes about the methodology. This is a mixed mode survey, so they use phone calls and text messages, which is pretty the standard for public research nowadays. It was conducted in mid to late September with 700 participants, so that it is statistically valid for the city of Seattle. It is weighted by demographic variables, so there is a spread. Each district in the city council district is represented in this, and it's also weighted towards the voter demographics that are typical for the city of Seattle. And it's registered voters, and that's a very important distinction from likely voters. This isn't a political survey, so there are no candidates that are tested. There are no specific individuals that are again, people are asked about anyone specifically. So we feel that this is a very good representation of where the residents of Seattle kind of view things, public issues today. We use EMC Research, which is a well-established local research firm that I think most people would be familiar with in this space. And as I mentioned in this slide, we use registered voters. Registered voters also means that we are getting a more diverse view. When you go to likely voters, you tend to get more homeowners and you tend to get more white voters as opposed to any diversity. So registered does give you a little bit more of a breadth in the city. One important note on this too is 6 in 10 voters in the city identify them as Democrats. So when you look at this research, you can kind of look at a profile you would create in your head of an average voter and understand that a majority of them would identify as a Democrat and have those type of leanings overall. 2 summary slides here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these so we can get to the public safety questions. But we worked with EMC to create a scale of 0 to 10 for the overall quality of life and how people feel. And this one you'll see when we get to that graph that it's at 4.23, which is not high and demonstrates that there are a lot of concerns in the community. But it also shows, and you'll see in this chart that it's flat, it's flattened out. And the message in this summary slide is basically there had been slight progress made since we started doing this 2 years ago, and that is stalled out. And we feel pretty confident in pointing at public safety concerns as to the reason why the optimism has kind of hit a brick wall at this moment in the last 6 months in particular. When it comes to public safety, and I think there are a couple of important points on this slide that demonstrate, one, people still have a pretty significant concern for homelessness in the community. That was the number one issue, and now public safety is tying that as the top concern in our community. So you'll see that demonstrated in the results. Also, it's really important to note in this slide, I'd say, one, still a lot of concern when it comes to property crime and car break-ins in the city. And that solving public safety issues would very significantly impact our overall quality of life. Voters are in favor of hiring more police officers and addressing racially biased policing, and that's really important too. You're going to see some data points later in the presentation where I think if you're not looking through the right lens, you would think that Seattle voters had taken a really significant turn towards enforcement of laws and fentanyl and drug laws in particular. But I'd still like to remind folks, and this is how we're viewing this data, Seattleites want an all of the above approach. They want racially biased policing to be addressed. They want reforms in the NSPD. They want a third force of individuals that can help folks that are facing addiction and behavioral health issues, rather than just saying, there's a hard tactic on enforcing laws. So through that lens, I'll keep going through this. The overall quality of life again. Here's that chart I mentioned. Again, a little bit of optimism we had seen kind of starting to trend up, and now it's plateaued again at 4.2. And these, this is an aggregate or a compilation of all of the major questions that you'll see here addressed on this side. Right direction, wrong direction. Or do people feel like we're heading in the right direction? The numbers in parentheses are compared to the last iteration in April. So again, most of these are staying pretty flat overall for where people think quality of life is overall in the city of Seattle. Optimism is kind of flattened out overall. Last time we asked for the first time if you were proud to call yourself a Seattleite. That number has dipped slightly, and so we're a little concerned about that. What are the top concerns? And this is an open-ended question. So, there is no list of issues that the individual may read out to the participant, but rather open-ended. So these are what people are telling the interviewer. Homelessness is still number one, but now public safety, crimes, and drugs have nearly tied it. And so we pretty much call that even. And homelessness has dropped 5 points, and crime, drugs, and public safety have gone up 10 points. Another notable point on this is you'll see racial issues, policing, and police brutality have gone up 5 points. Again, that goes to demonstrate that Seattle voters are looking at this through a pretty sophisticated lens. They're not, they're concerned about crime. They want to see action on it, but they also really want to see reforms when it comes to policing. You'll see that went up 5 points in the last 6 months, and I certainly would think that some of the issues that we've seen in the media in the last 6 months, obviously Officer Otter's comments about the tragic loss of Ms. Kandula I would say would certainly be reflected in these numbers as well. Here's that trend line. So you can see how homelessness has kind of had a steady drop. People are feeling like they see improvement when it comes to services offered to the homeless individuals. People are actually getting into housing programs, and they're seeing some commitment from the city and the county in this space too. And you'll see again that crime has jumped up significantly, 10 points, and we attribute that primarily to the concerns when it comes to drugs. We've got some questions later in the survey that point to that. People are very frustrated with the fentanyl crisis and the impact that they're seeing. downtown and in their own neighborhoods. Improving quality of life, and this is also really important. What would, again, what actions would be needed to improve the quality of life? And respondents, again, we measure this really looking at the very significance of the darker bar, part of that bar. That's the highest score. So that means that 63% of respondents, for example, said that gave it the highest score for addressing violent crime and gun violence is the first thing that should be done. Maintaining bridges and infrastructure actually, would be closely behind it if you took the whole entire score, but that very significant, that again is where we're looking at, like, how strong is the opinion on this action to improve quality of life. And so again, addressing violent crime and gun violence has gone up 6 points. On the public safety points in particular, these are 3 questions we've been asking since the beginning. And again, you're seeing that downtown, we obviously have a focus on downtown with revitalizing the economic engine of the region. But the first question there you'll see is not about specifically downtown, but about the neighborhood individuals live in. It's stayed pretty consistent. That hasn't moved. Very slight improvement in the more safe than it was before. But that number is still concerning. It's not there. Typically in before the pandemic, there used to be a lot of tension about, downtown getting more services and having a different feeling of safety in your own neighborhood. And that has completely flipped around since the pandemic, and people are expressing their concerns here as well. You'll see 2/3 of respondents say they feel safe visiting downtown during the daytime. For those of you like me that work downtown, I'm downtown every day. It has become, the last year is much more vibrant. There are more people. And so this number has been going up a little bit for us significantly, but 30% disagreeing with that is still pretty high. I would feel safe visiting downtown at night. That has not changed, and there are still significant concerns there, and obviously concerns for public safety. Here are some new questions, and we put these in, and we use this language specifically because we wanted to see how, where voters really were on, if you put language that isn't pushing or testing the boundaries, really, you won't know how strong support is. So, we use language like Seattle's hands-off approach to people using illegal drugs like fentanyl, meth, specifically to see if that's where voters were. And you'll see that voters overwhelmingly agree, 61% strongly, that the city's hands-off approach to illegal public use is impeding downtown's recovery and that activation. And 2/3 disagree, with 51% strongly disagreeing that drug laws should not be enforced until underlying causes are addressed. So again, testing that language, and that's why I referenced, this number is high, but again, Seattleites want an all of the above approach. They want to see some more social services. They want to see the third force. They want to see SPD.
Yeah, 333. That's all I want to say about that.
Here's another new set of questions that we asked, responding to 2 different statements. And by a 44-point margin, Seattle voters say illegal drug users need to be arrested and prosecuted if they refuse treatment, rather than left alone because arresting people for addiction is wrong and ineffective. Again, we use language specifically that advocates on both sides of this issue are using in their communications to see where respondents are feeling on this, using the term war on drugs to see again if voters agreed with that sentiment, and a vast majority prefer to have prosecution implemented. A strong majority continue to agree that hiring more police officers needs to be immediate priority, and 3/4 now say they do not trust the city council to reform SPD. That's really the only question that we do test, one of the parts of city government, and wanting to see where, if voters have trust in the council to fund those actions in that space. So those are the data points. I think, just in the subgroup areas, here's a profile of all the people that were surveyed. That gives you a little bit of a sense of again, the breakdown in the diversity of respondents. And this is a pretty accurate snapshot of voters in the city of Seattle for municipal elections. So just to be able to give a little bit of context. In the next set of slides, you're going to see we do break this down by geography, and we group them as north, central, south. It's not a good idea to break them down by district, because with 100 respondents, then your data becomes it's not going to be as reflective or accurate. So that's why you group them together. The higher the number, the more precise you can be. And I'm going to, skip ahead to a couple of questions that I think demonstrate, where voters really are in alignment. The folks that we work with at EMC, if they were here today, they would say they've never seen anything like this when it comes to alignment of Seattle voters in the last 30 years. And so on this slide, for those of you in the room, it's on slide 27. And this is that question of Seattle's hands-off approach to fentanyl and meth use is contributing to increased levels of crime. The only outlier in this are people that would self-identify as socialists. Everybody else is nearly above 80%, or in the high 70s. You just very rarely find alignment from this, diverse group of respondents on any issue. And then, to reflect that, the next question, underlying, rather than, this is the address the underlying issues causing addiction before enforcing laws, it's the exact opposite. You do see a little bit more of an increase when you're talking about some, folks that are in their, obviously you see the demographics by age. There's a little bit of a bump up from the 30 to 39-year-olds, and with people that have lived in the city for less than 10 years. But again, a very strong alignment of voters on where they are with this. So we do this twice a year. We release this in April and October. We did this again in April. Our survey was almost identical with the exception of the public safety numbers. So our goal with this is just to keep our policymakers focused on the priorities of voters and Seattle residents. There you go. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Erickson. This is informative, not surprising, but it's good to see the numbers in chart. Are there any questions? Commissioners, any questions?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Thank you for this. One of the comments I have is that I really agree with what the top concern is, public safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that I think that the city council does not know how to fix it, because on 2020, May 24th, we had enough officers in the city And so I think it's a real indicative to what happens when you get crime escalates when people know that they're not going to be arrested, or it's not enough officers to actually come out. And so I think crime has escalated because of people know these things. And it's a shame. I came in 75, and so I mean a lot of people in this room have been there longer than me. But it's really it really is almost horrible in some ways to see what has happened in Seattle since this council has been elected.
You know, the predecessor on this today's presentation, Mrs. Lockhart, said something that I think is very applicable to this about building trust in the community. And really, trust is probably the key word here. There is a lot of mistrust still in our community when it comes to policymakers making the right decisions and with SPD. And we are seeing that still play out. And, you know, I know that's one of our goals is to continue to build that trust. And I think that's, again, reflected here.
But one of the things too is that nobody talks to the people who's the victims of the crime. They talk to the people who have services to be able to serve people, but nobody's talking to all the mothers whose children have been killed. I mean, that's a voice that never gets to be talked about, and how they might view the police, especially in their time of crisis. And so their voice is not ever heard. Last, you know, it's just hard to get their voice heard. It's the other people who might be suffering in a different way, but that's not. I mean, clearly we have a problem with SPD, but 49 SPD didn't shoot 49 people this year in the last 2 years. I mean, actually, and I don't think we want to do both and. I think we just want to do both one, but not do both ends. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Walden. I see Commissioner Wilson's.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Erickson. So just two quick questions. I wasn't able to read very much of this as you were scrolling through the presentation. Is there any place that we can access the actual slideshow that you just presented? Is it on your website?
It's on the CPC website under meetings.
Okay, the presentation that you just made is actually there. Okay. And then I guess I missed, so who actually conducted the survey? Was it an outside consulting organization? And then or was it just all conducted with your own staff?
No, it was done by EMC Research, which is a locally based public research company. They've been, I think they started in 1994. They're pretty well established in the region. Yep.
And you do it twice a year, so you do another one in the spring?
Yep, we do them twice a year. We did do we did do some focus groups this summer that were also primarily ended up being about public safety. But that research, you know, focus groups compared to the scale of this are not quite the same. So, you know, we did not put that data in this. We do on the chamber website, we release the entire index. We do not, you know, that is one of the goals or not the goals, so that is our commitment. We do not, you know, pull out data points that we think are concerning. We put everything out there. And so I just did not share that version with you all today because it gets into some housing and other issues that are not really germane to our discussions. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Well, thank you so much, Commissioner Erickson. Really appreciate this. I look forward to maybe being briefed in 6 months as to how things have changed or stayed the same, and if there's a council turnover, if that makes a difference in some perceptions of the residents here in Seattle. So thanks again. And if there are other commissioners who would like to present work from their areas of concern, we certainly would welcome you participating in one of our CPC meetings as well. So is there anything else that needs to be addressed? And then we will meet again on the first Wednesday of November, which is, let's see, what date is that? November 1st.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So at this point, this meeting is adjourned. Have a great day.